Welcome to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you are having a great start to your week. Yes, unfortunately, the offseason has begun for the Atlanta Braves, but that does not mean that we are stopping here when it comes to the Hammer Territory Podcast, a proud member of the family of podcasts under Foul Territory. And of course, as always, my podcast partner with me, Stephen Tolbert. Stephen, I know again, we wish that we were talking, about the Atlanta Braves going through another playoff series. Unfortunately, that was not in the cards this year, but we have plenty to discuss, and always it's a pleasure to be with you, man.
Yeah, what's up, Shawn? Yeah, it was, after the season ends, it's always a funny time because it's a mixed bag of emotions of not wanting the season to be over, but in some part of you kind of being glad that it's over and you can kind of take a break. And obviously this is a 12-month podcast, so the podcast itself never stopped, but just getting like a 7 or 8 day mental break from having to think about the team or thinking about the upcoming game or the pitching rotation or the lineup or, I was basically able to turn my brain off to all that stuff and just kind of watch playoff baseball, watch football. So I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of nice. It was nice to watch the Mets and Phillies play and not have really any emotional attachment to it. Same thing with like the Yankees and the Royals. So yeah, it is weird, and obviously we wish the season was still going. We wish the Braves were making a deep run into October right now. But on our side, obviously the off season has begun, and like you said, the Braves they did make some news this week with the Alex and Snit had their exit interview and some other things that we're going to get to tonight. But it's always good to talk to you, buddy.
Absolutely. And the reason why it's so much fun to talk with you, Stephen, is because that's the great thing about baseball is that even when you don't have a season that you had hoped for, even when it ends early, and there's, just to be honest, there was more negative than positive when it came to the 2024 season for the Braves. There's so much to talk about because, like we say, this is a 12-month podcast because baseball is a 12-month sport. There's always something going on, whether you're still playing for the title that year or you're prepping to get in the best position to go after the title the next season. And one thing that we've constantly seen when it comes to the Braves is that, especially over the past 3 years, once they've exited the playoffs earlier than many expected, earlier than, we know they wanted to exit the playoffs, I got to give credit to Brian Snitker as well as Alex Anthopoulos. They always are right there within 48 hours, ready to answer questions that they know are going to come their way, tough questions that they know are going to come their way. And that's once again what they did on Saturday, this past weekend. And Stephen, you and I talked about it, last time we did a podcast last Thursday, and I had mentioned my hope was that Alex Anthopoulos would be candid. He would specify. He would show that he understood. And I know he does, but he would definitely say it. He would provide candid thoughts about the fact that yes, we underperformed this year, not just in terms of luck, but also in terms of approach. We did not live up to our standard when it came to our offensive approach this season. I will say the questions that came to him set up that type of answer, but I didn't leave, feeling like that we got that. And I shouldn't be surprised. Alex Anthopoulos has never been one to throw his players under the bus, what have you. But it seemed like that the one thing that he was really, really trying to do was put emphasis on the fact that they dealt with more injuries than they expected to, which, yes, played a big part in this season overall, and also underperformance. But there wasn't as candid of a approach to, hey, we didn't live up to our standard that we did offensively. Changes are going to need to be made. I didn't come away feeling that was, truly what he felt caused the issues this season. What are your thoughts on that? Again, not going to put too much emphasis on what he said. I just would have liked a bit more of a, admission that, hey, we just didn't play well offensively this
Yeah, those exit press conferences are always interesting because obviously everybody is looking for they're looking for sort of morsels of information that we can actually expound upon and even try to find a kernel of truth. And it's very interesting because those press conferences for GMs and for presidents of baseball ops, there is one goal in those press conferences, and that is to make everybody believe that the status quo is good enough. That's what they're all trying to do. And the reason they're all trying to do that is because none of them want to be put in a situation where they have to make a move and everybody knows that they have to make a move. And so that's why you get answers, about Orlando Arcia, who was it the strongest endorsement I've ever heard? No, but he said things like, well, you know, typically he's supposed to be batting ninth, and if everybody's healthy and productive, then he's not going to kill you down there. He was an all-star last year. He essentially gave you if he's back at shortstop next year and everything else goes right, the status quo is okay. And then, he was talking about, the pitching side, and he was talking about how good the top four are with Sale and Strider and Lopez and Schwellenbach. And, people were expecting him to be like, no, we need to go out and get pitching. And he said, well, I like our top four. I like our depth. If something makes sense, we'll do it, but I'm not going to promise anything. His whole thing, and it's always been this way, is he is trying to convince everybody that how it is right now, how the roster is right now, the status quo is good enough. And I remember a couple of years ago when the Braves had three catchers. The Braves had Manny Pena, they had William Contreras, and they had Travis d'Arnaud. And everybody assumed they were going to trade one. And Alex came out and said, well, I like having the depth. I like having, we're not really interested in trading any of the guys. We always have injuries, stuff like that. He essentially just, status quo is good enough. And then a week later, he traded two of them. And that's what he does. He is the master, and I do mean master. He is phenomenal at making everybody in the room, all the fans, all the media, any other teams listening. He makes everybody believe that the roster he has right now is good enough. And I don't even think, I know for a fact he doesn't believe some of the things he says because I've watched it. I mean, I heard him say that Vaughn Grissom was going to play left field last year, and there was not a chance in hell that Vaughn Grissom was ever going to play left field for the Braves. But he said it like 5 times, and because he needed people to believe that. And I don't believe him about Orlando Arcia. I don't believe him about the starting pitching. I think the Braves absolutely have to go get starting pitching. I believe the Braves are absolutely going to look to improve shortstop. But when he's sitting there in front of cameras and in front of media, he is always trying to make people believe that status quo is good enough. And that's what he did. We got to listen to the full audio clip. It's basically 35 minutes of him saying, well, if this and this happened, then we would have been fine. That's what he does. And I know people get annoyed by it, and I certainly get annoyed by it at times, but all he's trying to do is convince everybody that he doesn't have to make any moves, and because he doesn't want to be put in a difficult spot with negotiations. So and he's really good at it. And that was my main takeaway, is that Alex is just always trying to convince people that how it is right now is good enough. And if there's something there to be done, then they'll do it. But if not, then they're fine walking away. And it is funny to listen to him do it over and over again, because he is a master at it.
Well, and I am again, I am an avid Alex Anthopoulos supporter. I think especially when it comes to making moves on the margins, he has done a phenomenal job. He does a great job. He is so in tune. I don't think that there's a general manager out there who, when there's clearly needs the Braves need to have to try to put themselves in a position to be better, where there's clear weaknesses, Alex Anthopoulos has a great way of being able to go make moves, and a lot of times the moves no one anticipates, in order to improve those weaknesses on the fly, especially in the middle of the season. But I also do feel that there's a bit of room for criticism, because if I'm correct, the three most recent additions to the Braves' current starting lineup that Alex Anthopoulos has made has been Orlando Arcia, has been Shawn Murphy, and has been Jared Kelenic. All the other players were already in the organization before Alex Anthopoulos came, or were drafted or traded before those three players. And right now, when you look at this Braves lineup, when you look at this Braves position player roster, those are the three areas where, when you look at it, you're probably going to see people say, okay, these are the three areas where we really could upgrade, where we really could improve the most. Now, I don't think they're going to do it at the catcher position. They've got too much of an investment in Shawn Murphy, and I still believe his talent is there. But Orlando Arcia and Jared Kelenic are certainly players who I feel are going to be on the roster next year, but I also would not be surprised if we try and go and upgrade. So my point that I'm getting at is to your point, yes, Alex Anthopoulos can speak all the words that he wants to, and he does a fine job at it. But at some point, performance and actions do speak louder than words. And I think that we've seen multiple years now to where the position players that Alex Anthopoulos has gone out and acquired, they have not performed to the level as other players have in previous years. And so things have to change. Something has to change, or he's got to quickly say, okay, these players that I've gotten, they're not working out as they needed to. I need to go get something that will provide more of an instant upgrade. I think that's a fair area to criticize, and I think that that's why when it comes to how the Braves are going to approach the offseason, Alex Anthopoulos has got to realize, okay, I need to make moves that are going to make this offense better, even if it's me admitting that a pass move that I made was the wrong one.
Yeah, they're not gonna. There's no chance that they're gonna move on from Murphy. He had obviously had a terrible. We've said it multiple times on this podcast. Brad and Scott said it the other night. He had a terrible year. Like, he just had a terrible year. He did get hurt at the very beginning. Snit talked about it in his, when he was speaking, that he thought just Murphy never caught up, and there is some truth to, when you get hurt at the beginning of the year and you miss that much time, and when you come back, like everybody else is well into the season, everybody else is get knocked the rust off, and you're just constantly trying to play catch up. And it doesn't help that he splits time with d'Arnaud, so it's harder for him to play catch up than probably any other player who plays every day. I do think that there's some validity to that, but yeah, Sean Murphy has to be better. I mean, it doesn't help that William Contreras had a monster year for Milwaukee, of course, because those two players were essentially, not technically, but essentially traded for one another. And somehow Oakland didn't end up with either player, which is hysterical, but that's just Oakland for you. So yeah, Sean Murphy's got to be better, but they're going to give him every opportunity. Obviously, they've got a lot of money tied him to Shawn, but yeah, shortstop and left field, I feel like we've been talking about for about 3 years now, quite honestly. I mean, every other position on the diamond is pretty set relative to long-term, locked up pieces, and shortstop and left field just kind of consistently hang out there. And, in 23, Arcia had such a good year that, it felt like the Braves could probably survive one more. After the season that Arcia just put up, I don't know Alex is going to get, this year Alex got the benefit of the doubt because Arcia had such a good year last year. I don't think he's not going to get that benefit of the doubt again. Arcia just came off a horrible year. He was miserable offensively. He's a good defender. I think he gets more credit than he deserves. I don't think he's like an all-world defender. I think he's a solid defender at shortstop, but when you add in the offense, it's pretty rough, quite honestly. I think he finished at like under one WAR, is essentially a replacement level player last year, which is what he is. I mean, he's a bench piece, and that's how he's paid. That's what he should be. He should be the Braves like number one bench utility player. He'd be a hell of a player in that role. But yeah, they got to go to shortstop. They got to get a left fielder. The outfield situation we could do a whole show on, just because of Acuna and Soler and Ozuna and Laureano, and then add in Kelnick, and who the hell knows what you're going to get from him. Yeah, the whole outfield situation. We're probably going to do multiple shows on the outfield this offseason because it's so interesting. But yeah, shortstop is the one where, and Brad said it on their show, like it wasn't a ringing endorsement that he gave Arcia. Like, he definitely left some room where he could say, like, no, I was looking the whole time for a shortstop. Like, it was not the strongest endorsement I've ever heard. He did put a lot of qualifiers in there about injuries and about if he's batting ninth, he's not going to kill you. And, he had an all-star year. Like, there were qualifiers in there for sure, but he also didn't he didn't plant the flag and say like, no, this guy's our shortstop. We love him. We trust him. He didn't say any of that either. So I think shortstop, I think this is one of those situations again where he's saying stuff to try to convince people that he doesn't have to make a move when, in his head, he knows I need to go find a shortstop for this franchise.
We get it. Mornings are nuts. No time for breakfast, but you need to get your day started right.
What if a delicious, nutritious meal could be ready in seconds? Support for Foul Territory is brought to you by Huel, the world's #1 complete nutrition brand. With over 400 million meals sold worldwide, Huel is trusted by millions of people looking to fuel their days with convenient, complete nutrition. Try it for yourself with this exclusive FT offer. 15% off with the code FOUL at Huel.com.
You know we're all about saving time, but we get hangry, like a lot. I recently fell in love with the Huel Ultimate Super Greens Powder, which is a perfect blend of 91 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. I also love their complete nutrition bars, And those hot and savory pouches are fire too.
FT fam, give it a shot. Get 15% off with the code FOUL at HUEL.com. Unlock a healthier, easier way to eat with Huel. Nutritionally complete meals in minutes so you can focus on what really matters.
And I definitely think that that is going to be one of the biggest offseason needs. I definitely feel, last year when it came out of the exit interview, the big thing that we certainly felt was going to be the major focus of the offseason was pitching. And lo and behold, Alex Anthopoulos went out, made multiple moves. He extended some players that he already had in the franchise, went out and got names such as Aaron Bummer, Chris Sale, and Ronaldo Lopez, and the results were better than anybody could have expected. I'm not sitting here saying that I feel that he's going to make multiple moves to improve the offense. In 2025, we're going to have an even better offensive year than we did in 2023. But I do think that when it comes to this team, I don't think the core needs to be messed with. Riley, Acuna, Harris, Albies, Olsen, Murphy. I think you're fine with those players. I do think that it makes sense to go out and get multiple upgrades potentially in left field and shortstop. We'll see eventually what the Braves do, but of course we have all offseason to speculate on some players that could make sense. But the one other thing that I think clearly we take away from 2024, if 2023 was defined by how historic the Braves offense was, I think 2024 was defined by, hey, if the Braves are not showing historic levels of power, how much they struggle in other areas of depth when it comes to their offense that are more important once they're not hitting that historical power. What I mean by that is that when the Braves are not, challenging, the all-time single-season team record for home runs, like they did in 23, when they're not doing that, more emphasis is put on how they do with runners in scoring position, how they do in high leverage situations, how they do at getting on base. Can they, consistently put the ball in play? Those things matter. And Steven, I think that, while we saw that the Braves can still hit home runs with the best of them, we also saw that in multiple other areas, they struggled, and they struggled mightily, and that's one big thing that really kept them from going where they wanted to go this season, even with the injuries that occurred.
Yeah, listen, 24 was just a perfect storm of events that led to a massive underperformance offensively. And the first thing you have to talk about is the injuries, of course. Like, you have to talk about the fact that Acuna missed 4 months, that Riley missed essentially 2 months, that Michael Harris missed 2 months, Ozzie missed 2 months, Sean Murphy missed 2 months. Like, all of that matters, and all of that needs to be said at the top. Like, that is probably the number one factor. On top of that, the Braves also had massive underperformance from guys who stayed healthy or guys who got hurt, but when they did play, they weren't the same level of hitter they were expected to be. And if you look at the numbers like OPS, look at, go grab any projection system from last year, Zips, Steamer, whatever. And the Braves had a number of players that finished with an OPS about 100 points below what they were expected to do. Not what they did in 2023, but what they were projected to do in 2024. The Braves had a bunch of guys. I mean, Acuna, Riley, Olsen, Murphy, Kelenic, Duvall, Ozzie, everybody not named Ozuna, basically. I mean, all the starting players not named Ozuna basically finished with massive underperformances in their OPS versus what they were projected. And so the natural question is why? Why did that happen? Like, what the hell happened? And if you look at the numbers, there are some interesting things. The Braves did suffer from a massive underperformance of their expected numbers, which means they hit the ball harder and better than the results ended up showing. Like, the Braves led the league in hard hit rate. They led the league in exit velocity. Those are really strong indicators of offensive success. And it just the results never quite caught up to the expected numbers. And I would bet very heavily that if the Braves did that again next year, they would not have the same level of offensive struggles they had in 2024. So that's part of it. There was an you have to talk about the injuries. Then you have to talk about the underperformance of the expected data versus the actual data. But then you have to talk about the situational hitting, which is what you're talking about. And I have a stat, in 2023, the Braves had the highest team WRC plus in high leverage situations. They had a 141 WRC plus in high leverage situations in 2023. In 2024, they had the second worst WRC plus in high leverage situations. In 2023, they had a 141 WRC plus in high leverage situations. In 2024, they had a 62 WRC plus in high leverage situations. So that's a drop of 80 points in WRC plus in the biggest spots of the game. And it's not terribly predictive. A lot of that is randomness and a lot of that is just small sample size noise. But that explains a ton of why the Braves seemingly every night struggled to get the biggest hit of the game. Where they came up with it so often in 23, they seemingly never came up with it in 2024. In 23, in the high leverage spots, they hit 40 home runs. In 24, in high leverage spots, they hit 10 home runs. Like it was just night and day difference in the biggest moments of the game when the game was going to get decided, especially as many low scoring games as the Braves played. In 23, they always came up with those hits. And in 24, they basically never did. The only team that had a worse WRC plus and high leverage spots than the Braves last year was the White Sox, who were arguably the worst team in the history of the sport. That was the only team that was worse than the Braves in high leverage situations last year offensively. And so you combine it all together, the injuries, the expected underperformance, the massive, massive underperformance in high leverage situations, it equals just a season worth of frustrations. And it's tough to ever think that you're going to have all of that stuff happen at the same time again. Baseball is a very cruel, cruel, cruel sport, and it's why we love it. It's why we hate it. It's why the highs are so high and the lows are so low. But yeah, it was, I mean, I know there's a massive hurricane going on in the Gulf right now, so I don't want to overdo the perfect storm analogy too much, but it really was a perfect storm of events of a lot of different factors that led to massive, massive underproduction, what we thought would be the strength of the team, which is the offense. And it just wasn't in 2024.
Correct. And so injuries and less luck, and underperformance when it came to expected stats, all those things certainly played a part. I think that I think that the fact that when it came to the fact that the Braves continued to be towards the top of the league in exit velocity, hard hit percentage, home runs, I think that speaks to reasons why you don't make drastic changes to this core, especially with most of the core being in their prime. I think that certainly makes sense. But I also think that you cannot ignore the regression that you saw from your best players in these situational hitting stats. Steven talked about how the Braves significantly regressed in those high leverage situations in the most critical moments of the game where they had the ability to make some type of winning play if they had success. Well, one other area that they struggled mightily in 2024 compared to 2023 was the area where in 2023 they had so much success. A lot of times they had the game won early on. But in 2024, they didn't have that level of success, so it was harder to win games. And of course, that's runners in scoring position. If I come across as beating a dead horse when it comes to runners in scoring position, I do apologize, but it cannot be ignored just how badly the Braves regressed in those situations. Take these numbers, for instance. And to clarify, these numbers with runners in scoring position are from May 1st through the end of the season in 23 and 24, because over the past couple of years, April has been a bit of an outlier. So these numbers I'm about to give are from May on each season when the Braves have really kind of defined their season offensively. In 2023, when runners in scoring position, the Braves had the second best strikeout percentage, the second lowest strikeout percentage, just under 19%. They struck out just under 19% of the time with runners in scoring position in 2023, second best in the majors. In 2024, they had the 26th best. They struck out 7% more of the time, at a 7% higher rate in 2024 than in 2023 with runners in scoring position. That is a massive increase in terms of not putting the ball in play. That's why we saw so few productive outs with runners in scoring position. Walk rate, the Braves went from 6th in the majors in on base percentage with runners in scoring position in 2023 to 29th in the majors in 2024. They did not put together good at bats. They did not draw walks in 2024 at anywhere near the clip that they did in 2023. You also saw their ISO, what measures their power. That dropped from a 219 number that led baseball in 2023 to 167, a 50-point drop in ISO with runners in scoring position between 2023 and 2024. And the biggest thing of all, they went from a WRC plus of 120, which was fourth in 2023 with runners in scoring position, down to an 86 WRC plus, which was 25th. So the point that I'm getting at is that the Braves not being able to put together productive at-bats, swinging at balls out of the strike zone, not being disciplined, their inability to be selective in 2024 like they were in 2023, that made it harder to square up the baseball on a frequent basis, and thus that took away from their power. And because of the fact they struck out more, because of the fact they walked less, and because they didn't put the ball in play with as much authority, that led to a significant drop-off in their overall production. And the biggest takeaway from that of all, Stephen, is that I know I mentioned all these numbers and people think, okay, well, because of the injuries, that's naturally going to happen when you have a Gio Urshela or an Eddie Rosario or, an Adam Duvall struggling like he was, a Jared Kelenic. When you have those players happening to be up and running and scoring situations. We talked numerous times where it felt like every game Orlando Arcia was up at a big run scoring opportunity, and that is true. But you also have to consider that Austin Riley, Ronald Acuna Jr., Marcelo Zuna, each one of those players had an 8% or higher increase in their strikeout numbers with runners in scoring position. So it's not just the high leverage situations where the Braves struggled mightily. It's in general their ability to create and convert run scoring opportunities. It's going to be significant. It's going to be important. They have success in those areas moving forward if they're not going to hit home runs at historic rates. And 2024 was an indication they have a lot of room to grow in those situational hitting opportunities, especially when they have the chance to score runs.
Yeah. And I do want to point out, I do think it matters in this conversation that offense was down all over baseball last year. Like, I remember I looked this up like the day after the season was over because I was writing something about it. But in 2023, the league average OPS was 734. In 2024, the league average OPS was 711. So almost a 22, 23 point drop in OPS in terms of the league average number, which is obviously that's a massive drop. And there's been all sorts of theories about the ball. If MLB is still screwing around with the ball, the Braves had an unusual amount of barrels that died at the track. Braves fans will know what we're talking about there. So again, it was a unfortunate series of events that led the Braves down the road that, I mean, honest to God, like a single baseball season can have a ton of variance. The odds that season was the one that played out was like 1 in a million. Like everything that had to happen for that Braves team to pitch as well as they did and struggle all season long to even make the playoffs, like just the series of events that had to occur. You had to have debilitating injuries. You had to have massive underperformance to your expected numbers. You had to be just unusually bad in high leverage spots and in runners in scoring position relative to what you normally do. You had to have like a league wide offensive, suppression that we saw. Like all of those things had to happen for what we saw in 2024 to take place. And, I know everybody's going to have their theories and everybody's going to lean on one thing. You'll have people that say it's all the injuries. It's not all the injuries. All the injuries explain some of it, but I've said this before. I think that's a disingenuous way of looking at 2024 if that's all you talk about, because there are these other factors that we've talked about tonight that do matter and played a large role. Because again, the Braves had the number 1 ERA in baseball. Like the bar they had to clear offensively to be a really good team was not that high. I mean, just like an average offense, an average, that scored 4 or 5, 3, 4 runs a game on a consistent basis would have been just fine this year. Like they were very bad, especially in the biggest spots in the game. And that's what cost them. And the injuries were part of it. The underperformance to their expected numbers were part of it. The, league wide offensive suppression was part of it. And just, bad luck, just being unbelievably bad in high leverage spots relative to how good you are the rest of the game. And again, some of that is just noise. Some of that is small sample. Some of that is just randomness. That tends to correct over a larger sample. There's not typically when you hit better with runners on base than you do with bases empty, because pitchers pitch worse with runners on base than they do with the bases empty. If you look over a large sample, most teams hit about 10 or 15 points better when there's men on base versus when there's not. In 2024, the Braves actually hit much worse when there's men on base versus when there's not, which again is very weird. It doesn't happen that often. And over a large sample, it would never happen. But again, one baseball season, the amount of variance that happens in it, weird things happen. And for the Braves offense in 2024, it was just a crazy, crazy series of events that led to what we saw play out over 6 months. And it sucks. It was very frustrating to watch. I would be stunned if it happened again, just because of all the different things that had to come together to make that happen. But that's the season that we got. And that's the season that the team is going to have to live with. And that's the season that, Alex is going to have to go into the off season with to try to, make it better. And yeah, it was a wild year for a number of reasons.
And Stephen, as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, I want to, form this question to you based off what we've discussed and just get your thoughts. I agree. It's a bunch of crazy factors that went into this being a massive disappointment when it came to the Braves offensively in 2024, coming off one of the best seasons we've seen a team ever have offensively in 2023. Injuries played a part in it. Underperformance had a part in it. Bad approach in the most critical moments played a part in it. And the inability to be able to timely hit with runners in scoring position. So things outside of your control and things within your control, they all contributed to the Braves' struggles. But the question I pose to you is, how much do you think it, lies on the league adjusted to the Braves? Did they perhaps take what the Phillies had did in the previous two playoffs, and a bunch of other teams were able to do it over the entire season to where they prevented the Braves from being able to have as much success? Do you feel like that plays a bigger part in the Braves struggles than people may, put emphasis on? How much of it do you feel is the league adjusting to the Braves, which then, of course, puts more emphasis on this offseason, the Braves adjusting back to the league based off what they saw in 2024 from pitching approaches compared to 2023 and before?
Yeah, that's one of those things that over one season, even though one season seems like a lot of data, one season is actually pretty small in terms of trying to determine something like that. Like in 2022, the Braves, they had a good offense. They didn't have they had, I think they were like 7th or 8th in offense in 2022. In 2023, they came back and just were world beaters, the best offense we've ever seen, probably the best offense any of us will ever see in our lives. And then 2024, they had, I would say a below average offense. And if you look at the numbers past like May 1st, they had a bottom 5 offense in baseball after May 1st last year. So like, which one is real? Right? Like you had an unbelievable year in 2023, you had a solid year in 2022, and then last year you had a terrible year, especially after May 1st. So what's the real one, right? And again, one season has so much variance. They were always going to regress from 2023. 2023 is not real. Like there's no way to repeat that. So I'm gonna need to see another season. Like if it happens again, if next year the Braves get everybody back and they're still, everybody's like 150 points below their expected OPS, then there's a real conversation. Like what the hell? Like what's going on? Like something is very clearly wrong from a preparation, an approach. I know Sarah's talked about how the Braves were seeing a lot of fastballs and then they were seeing a lot of sliders and maybe they got caught in between. That would explain why we saw the Braves take so many fastballs right down the middle of the plate or swing and miss through them or foul them off. The Braves had an unreal year in terms of not taking advantage of meatball pitches, which is another part of, if you really want to really go down the rabbit hole, in terms of how Braves did on each pitch, like we could definitely do that. We might do that at some point in the offseason if we need some content. But yeah, I'm going to need to see another year before I'm convinced that, the league has figured something out with the Braves. I'm going to need to see a healthy lineup. I'm going to need to see a normalization of some of these batted ball stuff. I'm going to see a normalization of how they hit in different leverages because again, there's a lot of noise and randomness in those numbers. I'm just going to I'm going to need to see more data before I'm convinced that like the league has figured out some trick against the Braves. Um, so we'll see. 2025 will tell us a lot, but I do want to say, even though there are reasons to expect this team to be better just because it's a new year and guys will be healthy and a lot of this weird shit that we saw this year probably won't happen again, I don't believe that is a reason not to go make the team better offensively. Like, you got to go get a shortstop. You need to get a shortstop. Like, Orlando Arcia is not a starting shortstop. He's a really, really good bench player. He's a great clubhouse guy. He's paid like a bench guy. That's because that's what he is. He doesn't need to be a starting shortstop. You got away with it in 2023. He had this magical season. You just count your blessings for that, and you need to go find a starting shortstop. Left field, we can talk about. I can be convinced of a lot of different things, but if you want to help this team, in my opinion, yes, you're going to get guys healthy, but go get a shortstop. Maybe add a little speed to the lineup. That would help with the manufacturing runs and hitting. It's tough when you're so station to station as this team is. A little more speed in the lineup would not hurt. Like, if you went and got a shortstop that's got a little foot speed, Orlando runs like a mailbox, so that doesn't help. With his offensive struggles on top of it. So yeah, I would get a shortstop. I would maybe add a little speed. I've said before I would go get some more left-handers to help balance out the lineup. Like, there's things you can do, even though you did have a bunch of stuff go against you this year. If you're Alex, there's things you can do to go make the team better. And then on top of it, get hopefully a normal season out of a lot of this weird stuff that happened. And so that's what I'm going to be looking forward, to seeing what happens in that regard over the next, 3 months.
The one other thing that stood out to me, Stephen, from Alex Anthopoulos' exit interview is that he talked about 2021 and what stood out in 2020 in the 21 playoffs that has not been there for the Braves over the past three playoffs. And we could talk about the offense going cold, the offensive struggles all day long, and I think it is certainly relevant. But one other thing that he talked about that I myself have not put enough emphasis on, and I think that in general is not, people have not put a lot of emphasis on. In the 2021 playoffs, he gave the stat that the Braves allowed less than 2 runs per game in that 21 playoffs. And you talked about all season long how unsustainable that is, how it was going to be hard for the Braves to be able to win playoff games or important games to get to the playoffs 2-1, 3-2, so on and so forth. The Braves won their fair share with how good their pitching was. But it was never going to likely be a sustainable way of getting the job done. We saw it got the job done in 2021, but we've also seen that it's not been able to be sustained. Even in these playoffs outside of the Braves games, yes, in the division or in the wild card round, we saw 3-1 games, 1-0 games, things such as that. But now that you've gotten to division series, it's the first team to 5. So as awesome as it was to see what happened in 2021, the Braves' level of pitching success in that playoff stretch is probably going to be very hard for any team to do moving forward. If you do get a team that does it, they're likely going to make it to the World Series or be your champion. Being able to repeat that is very hard to do. So that's why it is so important for the Braves to not only be able to hit home runs, especially in playoff situations, but if that's taken away from them like it has been over the past 3 postseasons, they've got to have the situational hitting to be able to find offensively multiple ways to win when they've got to score a good bit of runs to be able to win playoff games.
Yeah, and the playoffs are a whole different animal, right? Like, it's such a, I mean, you talk about small sample. I mean, it's just a tiny, tiny sample of games. You have a very small amount of time to make any sort of difference. And, you know, the playoff failures, which are, by the way, are going to get louder. The murmurs are going to get louder if this happens again next year, where the Braves get bounced in the first round again. But yeah, getting your pitchers healthy to October, the Braves have not figured out how to do that. The Phillies somehow never have a pitcher ever get hurt, and the Braves always have a pitcher get hurt. I don't know how that happens, and I don't know the answer to it, and neither do they, obviously. But yeah, getting your pitchers to October healthy to give you the best chance, obviously, is step one. I'm guessing they're going to move on from Max Fried and Charlie Morton. Who they bring in and how they manage them over 6 months is going to be fascinating next year. But yeah, getting the guys healthy to October obviously is step one. And then you need some guys to perform. In 21, they had, Jock Peterson tear up in the Brewers in that series. They had Eddie Rosario tear up the Dodgers in that series. They had Jorge Soler tear up the Astro. Like, yes, you need your pitching, but you also need big offensive performances, which is where the Braves have really struggled in the last 3 postseasons, in my opinion, is they really have not hit at all. They've averaged like 2 runs a game over the last 10 postseason games. I don't care how well you pitch. It's tough to win like that. So yeah, the postseason's a whole different animal, but overall for the offense, there should be just some natural correction to some of this nonsense that happened last year and going into 2025. But there's also things Alex can do to help facilitate that. I think they need to get more left-handed. I think they need to get a little more speed. They need to get a real shortstop. There's other smaller things, but those are the big 3. And I'm very curious to see what he does. If he does any of that, what the names he looks at, but there are definitely ways he can help the offense on top of what should just happen naturally.
And naturally, in my opinion, we could talk about it all day long as we have. And I think there's so many great points, even beyond what Steven and I have covered in this podcast. We're going to have plenty more content, more specifics on some names that could potentially help out this offense and some other, perspectives, of how the Braves could go through, potentially making some subtle but relevant changes to the offense like they did the pitching staff last year. We saw how well that worked for the pitching staff. Not saying it's going to be to that level for the offense, but I am saying it may not necessarily need to be that level with the core that they've already got in place. But yes, I do think changes need to be made. It's going to be very interesting to see at what level they occur. Steven, do you have anything else for us on this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
No, sir. We're going to be here all off season. We'll be, 2-3 shows a week, something like that. Like Shawn said on the outset, there's always going to be stuff to talk about. As soon as the World Series is over, the offseason ends pretty quickly. Like, there's 5 days, and then there's, everybody gets going. And Alex is a guy that moves pretty early, pretty quickly in the offseason. January and February can be a little slow, but usually November and December, there's quite a bit to talk about. So we'll be here all off season. We appreciate all the support. We have the YouTube channel now that's grown quite a bit. We've got obviously all the normal audio spots that you could find podcasts, and we appreciate all the support as always.
Brad and Scott will be back with you later this week with another edition of the Hammer Territory podcast. And next week, me and Steven, we're starting to hear a bit of murmurs, a bit of rumors, about, some names that the Braves could potentially be connected to as the offseason develops. We may get a little bit more into names next time. I certainly don't want to talk too much about it without some substantial, reporting going on about names that could be connected for the Braves. But hey, it's always fun to speculate about the next big name that could become a part of the Braves to really put us over the top as far as being future World Series contenders. For Steven Tolbert, you can find him at B_outliers on Twitter/X. My name is Shawn Coleman. You can find me at StatsSAC on Twitter/X, at Hammer Territory, across all forms of social media and YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to and enjoy part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Check out all the great team content and Foul Territory content across social media as well. Until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.